north of Kasserine Pass, Tunisia, February 20th, 1943. What the German tank commanders saw that morning would never be completely documented in the battle report. American Sherman tanks performing actions that went against everything Wehrmacht doctrine claimed could be done without visual cues. 5 Sherman tanks, divided by fragmented terrain and without a line of sight, approached German positions with somewhat unnatural timing amidst the dust and smoke of the North African battlefield. No flares, no flags, and no dispatchers scurrying between cars. Nevertheless, they moved as one organism, with each tank hiding blind areas that the others were unable to perceive. Every crew member was aware of the precise location of their fellows. Tank commanders in German Panzers with Fuji 5 radios found it difficult to hear the leaders of their own companies due to static that overloaded their amplitude modulation systems. When tanks were moving, the German transmitters, which were state-of-the-art by the 1930s standards, could only reach a few hundred meters. The majority of German tanks merely had receivers. They were unable to call for assistance or report what they saw. The Germans were unaware that the Americans were using technology. Each tank has a frequency modulation radio, which cuts through engine noise and battlefield turmoil like a knife through paper, thanks to its 25 watts of transmission power, crystal-controlled precision and clarity. The greatest significant technological advantage of World War II was emerging 8,000 meters away from Detroit's manufacturing lines, not in gun caliber or armor thickness, but rather in the unseen electromagnetic vibrations that bound every American tank crew members together in ways the Wehrmacht could never have predicted. When the U.S. Army standardized the Signal Corps radio sets SCR 508, SCR 528, and SCR 538 for all medium tanks on July 22, 1941, the change started. American engineers at the Galvin Manufacturing Company, later known as Motorola, were developing frequency modulation technology that would make German systems obsolete while German forces advanced through the Soviet Union, using strategies that relied on radio communication between command vehicles. Henryk Magnowski, the lead RF engineer, overcame the technical difficulties of putting complex electronics in the hostile environment of a tank, and Daniel E. Noble, the principal RF engineer, came up with the idea to use FM technology in military vehicles. Their invention, which weighed 181 pounds, turned each Sherman tank into a node in the first combat network ever created. The power output of the BC-604 transmitter was 25 watts, which was 2.5 times that of the German FUG-5. With crystal-controlled stability, it offered 10 preset channels operating in the frequency range of 20.0 to 27.9 MHz. Commanders were able to simultaneously monitor various frequencies because to the STR-508's dual BC-603 receivers, an ability that would be vital in battle. Frequency modulation itself was the true revolution. Amplitude modulation systems suffered from static and interference until Edwin Armstrong's FM technology, which was licensed to the military, solved these problems. American FM radios provided clear speech communication even during artillery strikes, whereas German tank radios detected every electrical discharge as noise. Operation Torch delivered American armor to North Africa on November 8, 1942. Tanks from the 2nd Armored Division, equipped with SCR 508 radios that would soon prove their dominance over German communications, landed close to Safi and Fidala. Despite becoming the most seasoned armored unit in the Wehrmacht, the Afrika Korps faced significant communication challenges only. 1 or 2 of the 5 vehicles in a typical German tank platoon had complete FUG-5 transceivers that could send and receive only FUG-2. Receivers were transported by the remaining tanks. They were unable to react or report enemy positions, but they could hear orders. The German tank platoon operated according to a strict hierarchy. Instead of using words, the platoon leader used motions to acknowledge instructions that were communicated to subordinate tanks. The entire platoon lost coordination when the command tanks, which were immediately recognized by their numerous antennas, were destroyed. The Battle of Kasserine Pass, which took place from February 14 to 24, 1943, was the first significant example of American radio superiority. This weakness would prove disastrous against American forces when every tank could take command functions. The combat showed qualities that astounded Wehrmacht observers. While being a tactical German win, dispersed troops of the U.S. 1st Armored Division were able to coordinate over a 50-mile battlefield during the confusing fighting. Never-before-seen tank crews coordinated attacks, alerted one another to dangers, and requested artillery help via crystal-clear FM radio. When German signals intelligence teams intercepted American communications, they observed remarkable coordination and clarity. According to the intelligence branch of the 10th Panzer Division, American soldiers were able to communicate at ranges where German radios simply generated static. The fact that all American tanks seemed to be able to transmit fully, not only command vehicles, was even more frightening. There were significant issues with the German FUG-5 radios that used amplitude modulation in the 27.0-33.3 MHz frequency. Under ideal circumstances, the 10-watt transmitter could only reach 2 to 3 kilometers. While cars were moving, it dropped to just hundreds of meters. Every electrical motor, every track movement, and every spark plug firing produced interference that AM systems were unable to filter. When American armor arrived in Italy in September 1943, radio advantages should have been offset by the country's rugged geography. Rather, in circumstances that made German AM radios worthless, FM technology proved even more useful. Compared to amplitude modulation, the SCR-508's frequency modulation performed far better at handling the multipath interference of mountain valleys. During the assault toward Cassino, American tanks coordinated maneuvers through terrain where German communications failed totally and visual signals were impossible. Germans couldn't comprehend the powers displayed by American armored formations. Tank platoons divided by ridgelines executed precise attacks that, according to German doctrine, necessitated eye contact. After-action reports from the 1st Armored Division detailed regular cooperation at ranges where German radios simply generated static. June 6, 1944. Their SCR-508 radios kept in touch with naval fire support as Sherman tanks slid off landing ships at Normandy, making cooperation with German technology difficult. However, the hedgerow combat exposed a crucial weakness. Tank radios and infantry radios using separate frequencies were unable to communicate. Tanks operating in the 20.0 to 27.9 MHz band could not communicate with the infantry's SCR-300, which ran on 40.0 to 48.0 MHz. In the Bockenhague, this communication breakdown proved fatal because German infantry with Panzerfäusts could approach American tanks, while American forces nearby had no means of warning them. The issue was resolved in a matter of weeks thanks to American innovations. In ammo boxes that were riveted to the outside of the tank and connected straight to internal communications, tank crews installed EE-8 field telephones by late July. Operation Cobra. This small change transformed tank industry collaboration. July 25, 1944. Until July 30, 1944, the entire potential of American radio dominance was shown during Operation Cobra. Major General Edward H. Brooks' 2nd Armored Division used radio networks to coordinate more than 200 Sherman tanks, allowing for previously unheard-of battlefield control. The enemy that the German defenders from the Panzer Lehr Division had to contend with appeared to have supernatural knowledge. When other troops kilometers away reported danger, American tanks reacted immediately. Within minutes after identifying the target, tank radio-coordinated artillery strikes were launched. The German capabilities stood in sharp contrast. Germany's top armored division, Panzer Lehr, had fallen into a state of communication poverty. Without radios, the majority of tanks relied on visual cues in areas where visibility was rarely greater than 100 meters. Effective coordination was hampered by the interference and short range of the few operational radios. It was a stunning irony. The use of radios in armored warfare was first introduced by Germany. Since the 1920s, Heinz Guderian, the creator of the Blitzkrieg, had demanded that tanks be equipped with radios. In his 1937 book, Achtung Panzer, he stressed the importance of communication in armored operations. Tank officers were able to coordinate attacks thanks to Guderian's radio communication capabilities. He realized that dependable communication was necessary for quick armor advancements. However, by 1943, German tank manufacturing was unable to supply the radios that Guderian's own doctrine required. Statistics on German output showed the problem. Germany produced less than 2,000 FUG transceivers but about 5,700 medium tanks in 1943, regular. Tank units were severely lacking in communication equipment as a result of the large number of radios used to control vehicles and assault guns. The communication problems faced by Soviet tank troops were far more severe. Despite being the most manufactured tank by the Allies, the T-34 usually went into battle without any radio gear. When Soviet doctrine used pre-battle planning and flag signals against German forces in 1941, the consequences were disastrous. Lending leases offered some respite by 1943. Although Soviet command tanks were outfitted with American radios, such as SCR-508 sets, only around 25% of Soviet tanks had radios by the conclusion of the war. The comparison brought attention to American success. America deployed modern FM systems in every tank, whereas the Soviet Union struggled to equip even a fourth of its tanks with radios. The pinnacle of American industrial mobilization was symbolized by Motorola's Chicago plant. The company made vehicle radios prior to the war. Complete retooling and the resolution of previously unheard-of technical issues were necessary for the transition to military manufacturing. 248 separate parts that were produced to precise specifications were needed for each SCR-508. There were 385 resistors and 474 capacitors in the BC-604 transmitter. Crystal oscillators have to fight vibration and preserve frequency stability. In the face of temperature fluctuations, the tale of American industrial might was told by production data. 23 800 family radios SCR, 508 11,400 units in 1943. Over 50,000 tank radio sets were produced throughout the war, totaling 24,000 units in 1944. No other country was able to match this production miracle, which guaranteed that all 49,324 Sherman tanks built during the war were outfitted with advanced radio equipment. The benefits of the SCR-508 go beyond basic frequency modulation. Tanks were able to select channels prior to engagement and maintain alignment during combat conditions, because to crystal-controlled frequency stability. Variable capacitor tuning in German. Few G5 radios caused them to continuously drift off frequency. Commanders could keep an eye on both their company, command net and platoon net at the same time thanks to the dual receiver setup. Commanders kept an eye on the circumstances of their subordinates while orders were sent down the chain of command promptly. The radio and the BC-606 intercom system worked together flawlessly, enabling every crew member to notify the commander of threats. Clear communication during warfare was made possible via noise-canceling headphones and throat microphones. Due to the complete lack of intercoms on many German tanks, crews had to speak or touch each other. Another advantage for the Americans was power control. Operating on either 12 or 24 volts, the SCR-508 automatically adjusted to the power supply. Electrical interference was removed by the steady filtered power supplied by the dynamo motor power source. Every spark was picked up as static by German radios that were powered directly by the electrical systems of cars. The tactical benefits of universal radio deployment revolutionized American armored strategy. The combat command system relied solely on dependable communications, with adaptable task groups set up for particular operations. American leaders were convinced that their various forces could coordinate via suitable radios and form ad hoc fighting groupings. For German commanders, used to strict organizational structures required by restricted communications, this flexibility was perplexing. In September 1944, the 4th Armored Division encountered several German Panzer divisions with better Panther tanks during the Battle of Aricourt. American radio communication proved to be crucial. Even though the Germans had every edge in terms of armor and firepower, any Sherman could immediately notify enemy positions. Tanks that tank destroyers couldn't see sent them targeting information. Devastating bargages were called in within minutes by artillery observers in Sherman command tanks. In a 7.1 kill ratio that went against technical standards, the 4th Armored destroyed 281 German armored vehicles over the course of 3 weeks, while losing only 41 Shermans. German intelligence was unable to understand the importance of American communication dominance during the war. Although American cooperation was acknowledged in combat reports, training rather than technology was cited as the reason. According to an intelligence assessment that was acquired in September 1944, American tank units exhibit good radio discipline and coordination. This seems to be the outcome of rigorous communication protocols and intensive training. The technological edge was entirely overlooked in the study. American capabilities were never accommodated by German tactics. They planned ambushes, assuming that American tanks would lose coordination when separated, and they persisted in targeting alleged command tanks based on antenna configurations, failing to realize that radio contact preserved unit cohesion regardless of visual contact to March. 1945, American soldiers' superiority in communication peaked as they got closer to the Rhine. The Remagen Bridge's capture served as evidence of how quickly American command and control could be established. Within minutes of the 9th Armored Division finding the Ludendorff Bridge undamaged, radio messages were sent to 1st Army headquarters. Divisions from all around the front were moving to take advantage of the situation within an hour. German forces were unable to react as quickly because they were reliant on telephone links that American planes often destroyed. The bridgehead was impregnable thanks to American radio coordination. Tank platoons from various battalions worked together harmoniously, using radio networks to coordinate fires. German counterattacks that were badly planned because of communication breakdowns came in piecemeal and were thoroughly annihilated. The RER Pockets encirclement in April 1945 served as a prime example of American communication dominance using only radio communications. American armored columns from the 1st and 9th Armies orchestrated a convoluted double envelopment. 25,000 German soldiers were stranded inside the pocket, in part due to a breakdown in their communications. German communication nodes were methodically attacked by American fighter bombers flying under the direction of radio-equipped forward air controllers. Wehrmacht units stopped communicating with one another and with higher headquarters. The German predicament was made clear in Field Marshal Walter Model's last communications prior to a communication breakdown: no communication with nearby units, absence of contact with higher headquarters. Coordination is impossible, but fighting goes on. The psychological experience of tank warfare was significantly impacted by American radio superiority. American crews knew they were never fighting alone. Through radio waves, they maintained their connection even when they were geographically apart. On the other hand, German tank crews felt utterly alone. They fought separate battles within larger confrontations because they were unable to communicate. One of Germany's most accomplished tank commanders, Otto Carrerius, discussed the difficulties of restricted communications in his memoir Tigers in the Mud, although he concentrated more on tactical issues than the communication gap per se. The strategic ramifications go beyond specific conflicts, due in part to radio cooperation that German forces were unable to match. American advances in 1944 and 1945 maintained pace. Radio networks that kept control over hundreds of miles were essential to the Third Army's dash across France. Because they were unable to imagine the dominance of American communication, German commanders continuously overestimated American capabilities. As Inspector General of Armored Soldiers, Heinz Guderian acknowledged the issue but was unable to resolve it. He admitted in a memo dated December 1944 that German tank quality advantages were offset by American coordination. American technical intelligence personnel assessed German equipment following Germany's surrender. Their results supported the suggestions made by battle experience. German tanks frequently had extremely poor communication systems while having better armor and armament. According to U.S. Army Technical Intelligence Report No. 176, German tank communications technology lagged behind American systems by around 5 years. Critical vulnerabilities were brought about by inadequate electrical suppression, restricted radio distribution, and a lack of frequency modulation. Similar findings were made by Soviet assessors. Given access to German equipment that had been taken, the Red Army decided to build post-war American radio designs rather than German ones. The German predicament was made clear in Field Marshal Walter Model's last communications prior to a communication breakdown: no communication with nearby units, absence of contact with higher headquarters. Coordination is impossible, but fighting goes on. The psychological experience of tank warfare was significantly impacted by American radio superiority. American crews knew they were never fighting alone. Through radio waves, they maintained their connection even when they were geographically apart. On the other hand, German tank crews felt utterly alone. They fought separate battles within larger confrontations because they were unable to communicate. One of Germany's most accomplished tank commanders, Otto Carrerius, discussed the difficulties of restricted communications in his memoir Tigers in the Mud, although he concentrated more on tactical issues than the communication gap per se. The strategic ramifications go beyond specific conflicts. Due in part to radio cooperation that German forces were unable to match, American advances in 1944-1945 maintained pace. Radio networks that kept control over hundreds of miles were essential to the Third Army's dash across France. Because they were unable to imagine the dominance of American communication, German commanders continuously overestimated American capabilities. As Inspector General of Armored Soldiers, Heinz Guderian acknowledged the issue but was unable to resolve it. He admitted in a memo dated December 1944 that German tank quality advantages were offset by American coordination. American technical intelligence personnel assessed German equipment following Germany's surrender. Their results supported the suggestions made by battle experience. German tanks frequently had extremely poor communication systems while having better armor and armament. According to U.S. Army Technical Intelligence Report No. 176, German tank communications technology lagged behind American systems by around 5 years. Critical vulnerabilities were brought about by inadequate electrical suppression, restricted radio distribution, and a lack of frequency modulation. Similar findings were made by Soviet assessors. Given access to German equipment that had been taken, the Red Army decided to build post-war American radio designs rather than German ones. Statistics on production and deployment show how far America has come. Over 50,000 units were created by 5852-8538 American radios. 1,024 Sherman tanks were manufactured. 100% radio deployment rate, 25 W of transmission power. Controlled frequency stability crystal plus or minus 0.01%, range of 7 miles. 10 to 15 miles is the stationary range. About 6,000 Fu-5 radios were built by German manufacturers. About 12,000 medium-heavy tanks were constructed. 20% or such is the whole transmitter deployment rate. 10 W of transmission power. Variable of frequency stability plus or minus 1%. Moving range, 0.5 to 1 mile. Stationary range, 2 to 3 miles. Effectiveness of communication. American fire missions typically take 3 to 5 minutes. German fire missions typically take 15 to 30 minutes. American tanks are 100% coordinated. 20% of German tanks are fully communicative. The Sherman tank's radio superiority created the rules that still apply to armored combat today. The communication suites found in modern main battle tanks have a direct ancestry to the SCR-508 digital rather than analog, but they are essentially built on dependable coordination and ubiquitous deployment. Using lessons learned from World War II, the German Bundes reconstructed in the 1950s with a focus on communications. Complete radio systems have been installed on every Leopard tank produced. The defeat of superior German tanks by inferior American vehicles with superior radios teaches that information dominance outweighs platform superiority, according to a Bundes training manual. This lesson is validated by contemporary conflicts. During the Gulf War in 1991, Iraqi forces with individually better Soviet-designed tanks but subpar radios were routed by coalition forces with better communications. American forces once more proved in 2003 that network-centric warfare is superior to platform-centric combat. The tale of American Sherman tank radio dominance illustrates an electromagnetic spectrum triumph that was more significant than superiority in armor or weaponry. German tank crews were partially unaware of this revolution while fighting their war, realizing too late that each Sherman tank served as a node in the first battlefield network in history. In addition to being a fighting machine, the M4 Sherman was converted from a suitable medium tank to a part of a weapons system that comprised all other American tanks on the battlefield by the SCR-508 radio. This change turned out to be more significant than any armor or firepower upgrade could have been. In addition to its sloping armor and 75mm gun, each Sherman tank was equipped with 181 pounds of communication equipment that linked its crew to every other American tank crew, regardless of armor or firepower advantage. No single German tank could equal the collective wisdom provided by this relationship. Through painful experience, German forces came to terms with this fact. American tanks displayed cooperation that German theory claimed was impossible, without visual contact in the Kasserine Pass in the Italian highlands, across the Hedgeross in France and in Germany's last engagements. Due to their incomplete understanding of the technology divide, the Wehrmacht were never able to create an effective reply. Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel's alleged remarks upon Germany's capitulation. "You understood how to make them cooperate, but we knew how to construct superior tanks," encapsulated a basic reality. Whether it was apocryphal or truly quoted, America had constructed the first armored combat network in history, which included 49th and 324 Sherman tanks as well as 49th and 324 nodes. The first Sherman tank equipped with an SCR-508 radio entered battle in 1942, marking the beginning of the military upheaval that historians associate with contemporary network-centric warfare. Warfare was irrevocably altered after that. The side with better weapons would lose to the one with better communications. The connected would triumph over the isolated, and the network would beat the platform. The German forces were mostly unaware of this change. They observed the tactical advantage of the Americans but failed to acknowledge its technological underpinnings until far too late. The war was essentially won by the time German leaders realized that every Sherman tank had communication capabilities that the majority of German tanks did not. One of the worst intelligence failures of World War II was the German military's inability to acknowledge and adjust to American communication superiority. German leadership never gave, fixing their crucial communication flaw a priority, even though innumerable combat encounters showed American coordination advantages. While American troops constructed sufficient tanks that fought as coordinated teams, they persisted in producing superior tanks that fought as solitary entities. Ultimately, the SCR-508 radio's electromagnetic waves outperformed the German 80 mm guns' armor-piercing rounds in terms of power, the capacity to fight as a single unit rather than as separate vehicles, coordinate, and exchange information rapidly. Victory was decided by this intangible edge more so than by any apparent armor or weaponry. Superiority, the Sherman tank's radio. Superiority revolutionized warfare by introducing the idea that isolation means defeat and communication equals survival in contemporary fighting. On battlefields spanning 3 continents, German troops realized this fact too late. The Americans were better not just in terms of numbers but also in terms of technology, in the most important area, the capacity to fight for enjoyment.